She was forced to marry a cold millionaire widower, but on their first night, his daughter revealed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. A gray sky loomed low over the college town of Austin, Texas. The sidewalks were slick with rain, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and fading summer. Mark Davis hurried along the narrow street, his backpack hanging heavy on one shoulder, the weight of unpaid bills and unfinished papers pressing on his chest more than the books inside. At 23 years old, he was balancing his final year of law school, a part-time job at a bookstore, and the mountain of debts left by his late father. Every day felt like a battle he was losing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Mark stopped under a dripping awning, wiped the screen with his sleeve, and answered. "Mark Davis speaking," he said, his voice tired. On the other end, a woman's voice was crisp, steady, and commanding. "Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you this evening. It is regarding your financial situation." Mark frowned. "I am sorry, who are you? How do you even know about—" "I know enough," she interrupted smoothly. "Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 o'clock this evening. It is important." Before he could protest, the call ended. Mark stared at his phone as if it might explain itself, but only the rain answered, pattering against the awning. Eleanor Brooks. He had heard the name before. A wealthy widow, owner of properties across Texas, her name whispered in law classes as the type of client lawyers dreamed about. But why would she call him? Confused yet strangely intrigued, he shoved the phone back into his pocket and kept walking. His shoes splashed through shallow puddles as he tried to focus on the exam notes in his backpack, but the echo of her voice clung to him like the rain. That evening, as thunder rolled across the sky, Mark pushed open the glass doors of Brooks Bistro. Warm light spilled out, carrying the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee. The interior was polished, gleaming wood and marble floors, waiters moving silently in black uniforms. At a corner table sat Eleanor Brooks. She was striking. Silver hair swept into a neat chignon, a tailored navy suit fitting her with impeccable grace. Pearls gleamed faintly at her neck, and when her blue eyes lifted to his, Mark felt pinned in place. "Mark," she greeted, her tone calm yet commanding. She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit." Mark hesitated before sliding into the seat. "Mrs. Brooks, what is this about?" She took a slow sip of tea, then set the cup down with precision. "Straight to the point. Good. I know about your debts, the ones your father left. I know you are barely scraping by, working part-time, living on borrowed time. I am here to offer a solution." Mark blinked. "And what would that be?" Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes never softened. "Marry me." The words landed like a thunderclap. Mark's mind stumbled. Surely he had misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said steadily. "This is not about romance. It is a business arrangement. I will pay off all your debts, ensure your financial security, and in return you will be my husband." Mark let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You cannot be serious. Why me? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Eleanor said, leaning forward slightly. "You are young, unattached, and desperate enough to consider this. I do not need love, Mark. I need a companion, someone to share my name, my estate, and nothing more. Think of it as a contract." "Oh?" Mark's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back, his heart pounding. "This is insane." Her expression softened, just barely, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something human beneath the steel. "I have spent my life alone, Mark. I have no children, no family left. I want companionship, even if it is only for appearances, and I want control of my legacy. A husband will help solidify that." Rain beat against the window, filling the silence that stretched between them. Mark stared at her, torn between disbelief and the gnawing ache of his reality. His mother's medical bills, his sister's looming tuition, the rent overdue. Every door had been closing around him, and now, here was one opening into a world he did not trust. "I cannot," he whispered. "I need time to think." "Of course," Eleanor replied coolly, her eyes steady as stone. "But do not take too long. The offer does not stand forever. I will. Mark walked back into the storm, his jacket already soaked through. Each raindrop was sharp against his skin, but none sharper than the thought that for the first time in years, his fate might not be in his hands at all. It might belong to her. The rain did not let up that night. By the time Mark reached his small rented house on the edge of Austin, his jacket clung to his back, and his shoes squelched with every step. He fumbled with the key, pushed open the door, and was met by the faint smell of boiled rice and medicine. Inside, the lights were dim, the wallpaper peeling, and the air heavy with worry. His mother sat at the kitchen table, a blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders. She looked up from a pile of unpaid hospital bills. Her face, pale and tired, still carried the gentle strength that had carried him through his father's death. "Mark," she said softly, concern in her voice. "You are soaked. Where have you been?" He dropped his backpack with a thud and ran a hand through his wet hair. "I met someone. Eleanor Brooks." His mother's brows furrowed. "The Eleanor Brooks? The widow with the estate? What did she want with you?" Mark hesitated. His throat tightened. "She offered me a way out. She wants me to marry her. Not for love, for appearances. She will clear every debt we have." The words hung heavy in the air. His mother's lips parted as if to argue, but then she looked at the pile of bills again. The overdue notices, the red stamps, the figures that grew larger each month. Her eyes glistened. "Mark, I know it sounds unthinkable," she whispered, "but maybe it is worth considering. We are drowning. Your sister's tuition is due next semester. My treatments are behind. You are killing yourself trying to keep us afloat." Mark gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "You are asking me to sell myself, to marry a woman I do not love, just to solve our problems." "I am asking you to survive," his mother said, her voice trembling. "I am asking you to save us." He turned away, staring at the rain sliding down the cracked window. His father's voice echoed faintly in his mind, reminding him that a Davis always held his head high. Yet the truth pressed down. Pride did not pay rent. Dignity did not buy medicine. Later that night, Mark sat alone in his small room. He opened his backpack and pulled out a stack of legal textbooks, pages creased from endless study sessions. But instead of reading, he stared at the photo taped above his desk. Him and his sister Emily at her high school graduation, both smiling despite the storm already forming over their lives. She dreamed of medical school. He had promised her she would not have to give that dream up. His phone buzzed again. A reminder from the bank. Payment due in 3 days. He shut his eyes, pressing his palms against them. The weight of it all pressed harder than ever. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, but Mark's world still felt gray. At the breakfast table, Emily bounced in with a stack of college brochures. "Look, Mark, I got a letter from St. Mary's College. They might offer me a scholarship if I can show proof of financial stability. Can you believe it?" Mark forced a smile, his heart twisting. "That is wonderful, Em." His mother caught his eye across the table. Her expression said everything. "You cannot carry this alone." By noon, Mark found himself walking again toward the city, the decision weighing heavier with each step. Pride warred with desperation, hope with fear. When he reached the tall glass doors of Brooks Bistro once more, his reflection stared back at him, wet hair, tired eyes, a young man cornered by fate. Inside, Eleanor was already waiting. Her posture was impeccable, her expression unreadable. The contract lay on the table between them, neat and precise, a simple document that carried the power to change everything. "Have you decided?" she asked without looking up from her tablet. Mark swallowed hard, his voice steady though his insides churned. "I will do it." Eleanor set down the tablet and met his gaze, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Good. The arrangements will begin immediately." As he signed his name at the bottom of the page, Mark felt the pen burn in his hand. He was not sure if he had just saved his family or sold his soul. 1 week later, Mark Davis stood in a courthouse in downtown Austin. The morning air was heavy with humidity, but inside the courtroom, the chill of the air conditioning clung to him as he adjusted the borrowed suit that Eleanor's assistant had provided. His tie felt too tight, his collar stiff, and his heart thumped like a drum in his chest. The ceremony was brief, almost clinical. A notary, a lawyer, and 2 witnesses sat in the quiet chamber as the judge read the vows. Mark's words caught in his throat when he repeated them, not because he felt anything close to love, but because the strangeness of it weighed down on him. Across from him, Eleanor Brooks spoke her part without hesitation, her voice calm, precise, and entirely detached. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor turned to him with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis." Those words echoed in his mind as they left the courthouse. Outside, rain drizzled once more, streaking the pavement with silver threads. Mark looked at his reflection in a puddle and barely recognized himself. He wondered, have I just saved my family, or have I traded away the last piece of myself? A sleek black car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door for Eleanor, who entered gracefully, every movement practiced. Mark followed, sliding into the leather seat beside her. The ride was silent, except for the steady rhythm of raindrops against the windows. Eleanor gazed out at the city, her profile sharp and unreadable. After nearly 30 minutes, the car turned onto a private road lined with tall oaks. At the end of the drive, iron gates swung open to reveal a mansion that looked like it had been plucked from another world. Towering stone columns guarded the entrance, and windows gleamed like polished mirrors. Mark's stomach tightened. He had seen houses like this only in magazines, places meant for lives far removed from his own. The car rolled to a stop at the foot of wide marble steps. Eleanor stepped out first, her heels clicking confidently against the stone. Mark followed, clutching the small suitcase that held all he owned. The heavy oak doors opened, and the grand foyer swallowed him whole. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting golden light across marble floors and oil paintings in gilded frames. A housekeeper appeared, her expression carefully neutral. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. Show Mr. Davis to his room," Eleanor said, her tone polite but firm. She turned back to Mark. "Dinner is at 7 o'clock sharp." "No." The housekeeper led him up a sweeping staircase and down a long hallway lined with antique vases and velvet drapes. She opened a door to reveal a room that was larger than the entire house Mark had grown up in. A king-sized bed with silk sheets dominated the space, flanked by carved wooden furniture and tall windows overlooking manicured gardens. Despite the luxury, the room felt cold, untouched by human warmth. Mark set down his suitcase on the polished floor, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Later that evening, he found himself seated at a long dining table that stretched nearly the length of the room. Eleanor sat at the far end, dressed impeccably in a silk blouse and a strand of pearls. Between them, silverware gleamed under the chandelier's glow. Course after course was served by silent staff dishes, so carefully arranged, they looked more like art than food. "I trust you are settling in," Eleanor said, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. "It is different," Mark admitted. "This place is so large I feel like I might get lost." "You will adapt," she replied coolly. Her gaze flicked up, assessing him like a chess piece she had placed on her board. Mark forced a small nod, though his thoughts churned. This was not a home. It was a palace. And he was a stranger, walking its corridors. The contract bound him here, but every part of him screamed that he did not belong. When dinner ended, Eleanor rose with perfect grace. "Tomorrow we begin the public appearances. I expect you to accompany me." "Yes," Mark said quietly, though a knot twisted in his stomach. As he returned to his room, the echo of her heels on marble faded behind him. Alone, he sat on the edge of the vast bed, staring at the silent walls. He thought of his mother's tired smile, his sister's hopeful eyes, and reminded himself why he had agreed to this. But as the night stretched on, the silence of the mansion felt louder than any storm. For the first time since signing his name on that contract, Mark realized the true weight of his choice. He was no longer just a law student fighting to survive. He was a husband in name to a woman he barely knew, a player in a world of wealth and shadows. And though he told himself it was temporary, a voice deep inside whispered, "Nothing about this will ever be simple again." The following morning, sunlight streamed through tall windows and painted the mansion's marble floors in pale gold. Mark dressed carefully in another suit that Eleanor's assistant had laid out for him. The jacket was tailored, the fabric expensive, but when he looked in the mirror, he still saw the poor student underneath. He drew in a long breath and stepped out into the hallway. At breakfast, The dining table stretched out like a runway. Eleanor was already seated, sipping her tea with the same poise she had shown at dinner. Without looking up, she said, "We have a schedule today. First, a visit to the foundation offices. Then an interview for a lifestyle magazine. You will attend both." Mark nodded. "I understand." Eleanor's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to her newspaper. "This marriage is a partnership of appearances. We must look seamless in public. That means no hesitation, no stumbles, and no personal commentary. Do you understand that as well?" "Yes," Mark replied, though his voice was quiet. The day unfolded in a blur. At the foundation offices, Mark trailed Eleanor as she greeted executives and signed documents. The staff bowed their heads respectfully, whispering her name as if she were untouchable. Mark shook hands when introduced, but he could feel their eyes measuring him, weighing him, wondering what this young man was doing by her side. The interview later that afternoon was worse. In the studio lights, a reporter leaned forward with a smile too sharp to be genuine. "So, Mr. Davis, how does it feel to have married one of the wealthiest women in Texas?" Mark's throat tightened. The truth pressed against his lips, but Eleanor's hand touched his arm lightly, a warning disguised as affection. He forced a smile. "It feels like a new beginning," the reporter laughed, scribbling notes. "A fairy tale, then?" Mark swallowed the bitterness rising in his chest. "Something like that." When the day finally ended, they returned to the mansion. Mark loosened his tie and sank onto the edge of the bed in his vast room. He felt drained, like a puppet moved by invisible strings. In the silence, he whispered to himself, "This is not my life. This is hers." Outside, the gardens glowed under soft evening light, perfect and lifeless. Mark pressed his palms together, fighting the ache in his chest. For the sake of his mother, for the future of his sister, he would endure. But deep inside, a small voice reminded him, every choice has a cost, and his was only beginning to be paid. The first gala came only a few days later. Mark stood before the tall mirror in his room, tugging at the cuffs of a tuxedo. Eleanor's tailor had delivered that morning. The fabric was flawless, the fit exact, but it felt like armor rather than clothing. He stared at his reflection, at the anxious eyes that looked nothing like the confident men he had seen in magazines. He whispered to himself, "Just survive tonight." Downstairs, Eleanor was radiant in a floor-length gown of deep emerald silk. Diamonds caught the chandelier light at her throat. When she looked at him, her expression revealed nothing, but she gave a brief nod. "You will walk beside me, you will smile when spoken to, and you will not stray. This is important." The car carried them into the heart of the city, pulling up in front of the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel. Paparazzi lights flashed the moment Eleanor stepped out. Mark followed, blinking under the barrage of cameras. Questions flew like arrows. "Mrs. Brooks, is this your new husband?" "Mr. Davis, how does it feel to marry into such wealth?" Eleanor's hand tightened around his arm, and together they walked the red carpet into the dazzling interior. The ballroom was filled with the elite of Texas, politicians, investors, philanthropists. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Music swelled from a live orchestra, and laughter carried across the polished floor. Mark kept close to Eleanor, answering polite questions with careful phrases. But he felt the weight of every gaze. To them, he was an outsider, a poor law student who had stumbled into a world he did not deserve. Midway through the evening, a tall man approached, his smile edged with disdain. "So this is the husband," he said loudly, glancing around at the guests who had gathered. "Tell me, Mr. Davis, what exactly do you bring to this marriage besides debt?" The laughter that rippled around the group burned hotter than the champagne in Mark's glass. He froze, words caught in his throat. Eleanor's lips pressed together, but before she could speak, Mark found his voice. He straightened his back and said, "Respect, integrity, and a willingness to stand beside her no matter what others may think." The room quieted for a heartbeat. Then someone changed the subject, and the tension scattered into polite applause. Eleanor's eyes lingered on him for just a moment longer than usual, and though her face remained calm, there was a glimmer there, something unreadable, perhaps even approval. Later, as the orchestra played and couples danced across the floor, Eleanor guided him to the edge of the room. Her voice was low. "You handled yourself better than I expected. Mark exhaled slowly. "I am not here to embarrass you." Her gaze softened, only slightly. "We will see." When the gala ended and they returned to the mansion, Mark retreated to his room. He loosened his tie and sat in the silence, the words of that man still echoing. But alongside the sting was a new feeling he had defended himself, and in some small way, he had proven that he was more than a charity case. Outside his window, the gardens lay still under moonlight. Inside, he leaned back against the bed and thought of his mother and sister. For them, he would endure the judgment, the whispers, and the coldness of this new life. But for the first time, he wondered if maybe there was more to this marriage than a contract written in ink. Maybe, just maybe, there was something hidden beneath Eleanor's cold surface waiting to be revealed. A few nights after the gala, the mansion felt quieter than usual. Mark wandered through the long halls, his footsteps muffled against thick rugs. He ended up on the balcony outside the library, drawn by the faint glow of light. There, beneath the vast night sky, he found Eleanor standing alone. She wore a simple robe rather than her usual gowns, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman burdened by shadows. Mark hesitated before speaking. "You are still awake." Eleanor did not turn at first. "I do not sleep easily. The house is too quiet." He stepped closer, leaning against the railing beside her. The city lights flickered in the distance like fallen stars. For a long moment they said nothing, only listening to the wind move through the trees. Then Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "I built everything I have from nothing. People see the wealth, the estates, the influence. They do not see the loneliness that comes with it. My husband died 10 years ago. Since then, this house has been filled with people, but none of them have stayed." Mark glanced at her, surprised by the rawness in her tone. "You do not have to explain yourself to me." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Perhaps I do. You think of me as cold, calculated, and perhaps I am. But beneath all of this," she gestured toward the mansion, "there is a woman who is tired of being alone." Her confession struck him harder than he expected. For weeks, he had seen her as untouchable, as a force of wealth and control. Now he saw the fracture lines. "I lost someone too," Mark said quietly. "My father. The debts he left nearly buried us. I am still trying to keep my family above water. I guess that is why I agreed to this marriage. Not because I wanted it, but because I could not see another way." Their eyes met in the soft light, and for a brief moment, the walls between them lowered. The contract, the coldness, the staged appearances, they all faded, leaving only two people carrying grief. Eleanor looked away first, but her voice softened. "Tomorrow there is another charity dinner. I will need you there. But tonight, thank you for listening." Mark nodded, his chest tight with emotions he could not name. As he returned to his room, the silence of the mansion no longer felt as hollow. Something had shifted. The woman he had thought of as a stranger was beginning to reveal herself. And with that revelation came a dangerous thought. Perhaps this marriage might become something real. The following week brought a storm neither the weather nor the walls of the mansion could hold back. It began with whispers in the press. Headlines questioned the legitimacy of the sudden marriage between Eleanor Brooks, one of the wealthiest widows in Texas, and Mark Davis, a law student with no fortune and no status. Rumors spread like fire, each article painting him as a desperate young man who had sold himself for comfort. At first, Mark tried to ignore the noise. He told himself it did not matter what strangers thought. But it mattered when he saw the look in Eleanor's eyes at breakfast, the tightness around her mouth as she folded the newspaper. It mattered when he overheard two board members at the foundation office murmuring that the marriage was nothing more than a stunt. The pressure reached its peak during a private dinner with the foundation's trustees. The long mahogany table was set with crystal and silver, and the air smelled faintly of roasted lamb. Eleanor sat at the head, Mark beside her. Across from them sat Richard Hale, an old rival of Eleanor's late husband. His smile was thin, his eyes sharp. "So," Richard began, his voice smooth, carrying just enough volume for all to hear, "I see Eleanor has found herself a companion. Tell me, Mr. Davis, how long do you expect this arrangement to last? Until the ink dries? Until the next debt appears?" A murmur of laughter rolled down the table. Mark's chest tightened. He opened his mouth, but Eleanor's hand on his arm silenced him. She answered instead, her voice cold steel. "This marriage is none of your concern, Richard." But Richard leaned forward, eyes glinting. "The board deserves stability. We deserve to know if our chairwoman has married a partner or a liability." The room fell silent. Every gaze turned to Eleanor, waiting. For the first time since the wedding, her mask wavered. Her jaw clenched, her hand curled into a fist against the tablecloth. That night, back at the mansion, Mark followed her into the library. "Why did you not let me speak for myself?" he asked, his voice tight. Eleanor spun to face him, her eyes flashing. "Because you would have confirmed their suspicions. Do you think they would believe you? They see a boy who married for money. They see me as desperate enough to allow it." Her words cut, sharper than she intended. Mark flinched, then straightened, anger rising in his chest. "Is that what you believe too? That I am nothing more than a charity case you pulled off the street?" The silence that followed was louder than any storm. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. She turned away, shoulders stiff, and for the first time since their strange union began, Mark felt something inside him crack. Later, alone in his vast cold room, he paced the floor, his fists clenched, his mind racing. He had agreed to this marriage to save his family, but now he wondered if he had chained himself to a life where he would never be seen as anything more than a burden. In the darkness, his phone buzzed. A message from his sister Emily lit the screen. "I got accepted into St. Mary's College. We just need to figure out tuition. I believe in you, Mark." He sank onto the bed, the glow of the message cutting through the shadows. His sister's faith was unshaken, but his own was slipping fast. For the first time, he questioned not only Eleanor's view of him, but also whether he could bear the weight of being the husband she never wanted. The contract had bound them, but the distance between their hearts had never felt greater. The scandal did not fade. By the end of the month, newspapers and gossip columns were filled with stories about Eleanor Brooks's sudden marriage. The headlines were brutal. Some called Mark a fortune hunter. Others painted Eleanor as a desperate widow clinging to youth. The tension seeped into every corner of the mansion. Meals were colder, silences heavier, and even the staff moved carefully, as if the air itself could shatter. One morning, Eleanor summoned Mark to her study. The oak-paneled room smelled of leather and old books. Papers were spread across her desk, contracts and board reports. But it was the single envelope at the center that drew Mark's eye. "I have decided," Eleanor said, her voice clipped, "that it may be best if we dissolve this arrangement. The board is restless. Richard Hale is circling like a vulture. This marriage was supposed to provide stability, but instead, it has painted a target on us both." Mark felt the ground tilt beneath him. "So after all of this, you are ready to throw it away? You think I have not given anything?" Her blue eyes hardened. "You gave me a signature. You gave me a smile when the cameras flashed. But when the world pressed back, you cracked." Anger flared in his chest. "I stood in that gala and defended you. I faced ridicule at your side. Do you think it costs me nothing to hear my name dragged through the mud every single day?" Eleanor turned away, staring out the tall windows toward the gardens. For a moment her shoulders slumped, and he saw the loneliness again, the woman behind the mask. But when she spoke, her tone was once more icy. "This conversation is over. You may leave." Mark left the study, his steps echoing through the cavernous halls. He did not stop until he reached the front doors. The storm outside matched the one raging in his chest. He stepped into the rain, letting it soak through his clothes, as if the water could wash away the bitterness clawing at him. He thought of his mother's thin hands clutching medical bills. He thought of Emily's hopeful message about St. Mary's College. He thought of himself, a man who had traded freedom for security, and wondered if he had made the gravest mistake of his life. That night, Eleanor sat alone in the library, the firelight flickering across her face. A document lay before her, an unsigned annulment agreement. Her fingers rested on the pen, but she could not bring herself to sign. Every time she tried, she remembered the way Mark had spoken at the gala, the steadiness in his eyes when he had said he would stand beside her. She had built her life on control, but this was one choice that felt heavier than all the rest. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across town, Mark sat at the kitchen table with his mother. She studied his face, pale and exhausted, and whispered, "Son, you cannot carry all of this pain. If she does not see your worth, You must. Mark lowered his gaze, his fists tightening around the edge of the table. For the first time since the wedding, he allowed himself to consider walking away. But deep inside, beneath the anger and the pride, something still pulled him back toward Eleanor. Something that felt dangerously close to love. Several days passed in strained silence. Mark kept his distance, burying himself in his books, as if law school could shield him from the ache in his chest. Eleanor moved through the mansion like a ghost queen, her presence commanding but hollow. The annulment papers remained unsigned in her study, hidden beneath stacks of contracts. Neither spoke of them, yet both knew the fragile marriage was standing on the edge of collapse. The turning point came on a crisp Saturday evening. Mark returned from visiting his mother at the hospital and found the great hall alive with sound. Music floated through the air. He followed it into the gallery wing, a part of the house he had never entered before. His breath caught when he stepped inside. The gallery walls were lined with canvases, his canvases. The sketches and paintings he had hidden in his old apartment. The pieces he had created to escape the weight of debt and despair, now framed and displayed beneath warm lights. At the center hung a plaque, "The Art of Mark Davis." Guests mingled, sipping champagne, studying his work with genuine admiration. Mark stood frozen. "What is this?" he whispered. Eleanor appeared beside him, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. Her gown tonight was simple, elegant, not meant to outshine, but to belong. She met his stunned gaze and said softly, "This is your exhibition. I bought the space. I wanted the world to see you, not as my husband, not as a contract, but as the man you truly are." Emotion tightened Mark's throat. "Why would you do this?" "For once," Eleanor said, her voice unsteady, "I wanted to give rather than take. I wanted you to know that I see you, Mark. Not as a boy in debt, not as a liability, but as someone who deserves more than survival." Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them away. Around them, applause rose as a critic praised one of his sketches. In that moment, Mark realized the walls Eleanor had built were cracking. She was not the cold widow the world believed her to be. She was a woman who had risked vulnerability for him. The guests eventually departed, leaving the gallery quiet. Mark turned to her, heart pounding. "Eleanor, if we do this, it cannot be about contracts anymore. No more papers, no more conditions, only truth." She held his gaze, then slowly nodded. "Only truth." Mark reached for her hand, and for the first time, she let her fingers tighten around his. The silence between them no longer felt cold. It felt like the beginning of something real. Weeks later, under the soft glow of that same gallery, they stood together again. This time the room was filled not with strangers but with friends and family. Emily clutched a bouquet of flowers. Their mother smiled through tears, and the officiant's voice carried warmly across the hall. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Mark kissed Eleanor, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Around them, the guests cheered. Above them, the plaque still read, "The Art of Mark Davis." But tonight the gallery was more than his. It was theirs. For Mark, the best mistake he had ever made was signing that impossible contract. For Eleanor, the cold widow who had sworn she would never love again, it was finding the courage to open her heart. Together, they stepped forward into a future not bound by ink or wealth, but by something stronger: love, freely chosen.